The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers is at COP26 in Glasgow these days, and it released a set of recommendations for global leaders, along with 8 other energy associations. Well, I'm going to talk to Max Fawcett, a journalist and columnist for the National Observer, about them because they are, given the circumstances, a little odd. So welcome to the interview, Max.
Thanks for having me.
What do you make of this document?
It feels like the product of an organization that understood it had to do something and then did the wrong thing. I think, to their credit, they understood that they couldn't not go to COP or not have a position on it. That's what our provincial government here in Alberta is doing. But this is not the right approach at all. It is the sort of new position of the oil and gas industry, which is, well, you can't phase us out because you need natural gas. And, by the way, natural gas is better than coal and it's key to emissions reductions. And they've sort of spun an argument around this. And there's little kernels of truth in there, but they are massively overplaying their hand here. There's this argument about energy poverty and how we need natural gas to address energy poverty. And, I've had this conversation with a few oil and gas, call them senior personalities. And I put it to them that this is exactly the same as the whole cell phone landline debate in the developing world, where you didn't need to have a landline. You just skipped straight over it and went to the best new technology. And that's exactly what's going to happen in places like India and China and other developing markets in the world. They don't have to use natural gas. It is not a requirement. It is not, a station of the cross that they have to move through. And they're going to invest and procure the cheapest, lowest carbon energy they can. And increasingly, especially as batteries become de-risked and developed, it's going to be renewables. A country like China or a country like India, Jenny Burns, Stephen Harper's former, I believe, campaign manager, deputy chief of staff, she had a big rant about this on a podcast recently, where she said, well, what are they going to do? What are they going to use? If we don't produce it for them, they'll just get it somewhere else. And the answer is they're not going to want to buy it at all. The countries don't tend to want to pay for imports, right? And so they're going to phase out these sorts of imports as quickly as they possibly can. And natural gas, I think it is a bridge. It is a much smaller bridge than the industry thinks it is. And if they keep overplaying their hand like this, it's going to disappear in front of them.
There are a couple of really massive trends going on right now, and you and I have talked about this in previous conversations. The acceleration of the energy transition you see particularly around electric vehicles. I mean, the automotive industry is investing, hundreds of billions of dollars to switch rapidly over to electric vehicle manufacturing. You see battery plants popping up all over the place, new chemistries, new technology. I mean, it's breathtaking. You can hardly, the advances in the technologies, you can hardly keep up with them. And then couple that with the changes that are coming, and this is in full evidence at COP26, changes that are coming in government policy. Big trends, and of course we can't forget finance. Mark Carney and his speech at COP26, $130 trillion of assets represented. They're all ready to finance the energy transition and so on. So you have these massive global trends going, and then you have CAPP going in exactly the opposite direction. No, we want to export more natural gas. We want to export more oil, and kind of fibbing, fudging the numbers at best to make their case. So it's a losing argument in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give them credit in that they've updated their worldview from 2014 to about 2017 now, 2018. But they're going at a snail's pace. And the world is driving a Tesla down the highway. They are going so much slower than the pace of change. It becomes apparent that every day they fall further behind. And I think a particular irony in this document they've released is it has quotes from Tim McMillan and from Chris Bloomer, who Bloomer is the CEO of the Canadian Energy Pipelines Association, which will not exist soon. So incompetent has it been that it no longer needs to be a thing. And Tim McMillan announced his retirement the other day. So, you have these two empty suits, these two utterly uninfluential people putting their names on this allegedly serious document. It just speaks to how pathetic the state of affairs is for these industry associations. They're basically dead industry associations walking, for lack of a better phrase.
Well, let's talk about some of the, I alluded to them fudging the numbers, and here's one. And I'll read this from the document. The industry continues to use technology to significantly lower the carbon intensity per barrel of oil production, thereby reducing global GHG emissions. Well, okay, so it went down 19% in the last decade or decade and a half. Now it's at the average for the oil sands is at 70 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. The study you probably saw that study that came out just a couple of days ago, where Norway and Saudi Arabia are down at 18 kilograms of CO2. So if you're going to make that argument, why wouldn't you buy from Saudi Arabia and Norway? And Canada was second from the top in terms of carbon intensity. I mean, it's like this document is not grounded in reality.
Yeah, I mean, they are desperately holding on to whatever talking points they have left. It's funny, when I was at the government of Alberta doing market access stuff, trying to, help the NDP government deal with the growing divestment movement. These are the same ones that we came up with back then, pointing out the emissions reductions over the last decade, and they're not nothing. But if you're not telling people what the reduction comes from, what the baseline was, it kind of doesn't matter. And that study that you referenced from Nature really puts a fine point under it, which is that for all the improvements that have been made, we are still basically at the back of the pack. And so, yes, we're running, I guess, a little faster than we used to, but we're still not running nearly fast enough. And I don't get the sense that industry has the kind of urgency that it needs to on this. And CAPP has really been a driving force in not investing them with that urgency. They have been there to argue that they don't need to do anything, that they are doing enough already, and that's clearly not the case. I look at a project like the Johan Sverdrup project from Equinor in Norway. Now, granted, it's a lighter grade of oil than we tend to produce here in Canada, but that's a project whose per barrel emissions are under 1 kilogram of CO2. That is the benchmark. That is the gold standard right now. And we are nowhere close to it. So I would love to see industry get serious about this and really try to chase that. But as long as they have industry associations that are making excuses for them, fudging numbers, putting out charts that are dishonest, all the rest of it, they're not going to get anywhere. And that really is the root of the problem.
Well, let's talk about leadership here, because the CAPP, in my opinion, actually reflects the leadership of particularly of the big oil sands companies, the Suncor, Cenovus, and Shell. And we've seen, I don't know, in the last couple of years, I keep hearing now about these progressive oil sands CEOs and how they're moving in the right direction and they're the leaders and so on. They're miles behind everybody else. I mean, okay, they may not be behind Texas. I'll grant them that. If you go to Midland, Texas, you may find some less progressive oil CEOs than in Calgary, but that would be it. And they actually are really regressive. And what they are staking their companies on is business as usual with some bolt-on carbon capture and storage technology that they want government to pay for. That is their oil strategy. And if I was Justin Trudeau, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
I'm not sure I 100% agree with you there on carbon capture. I think that it is a very powerful carrot/stick that he can use to pull the industry forward. And at the end of the day, as much as I am frustrated with the lack of leadership in it, as much as there's a part of me that wants to see a certain amount of comeuppance get delivered to certain people, we all suffer as Canadians if that happens. If this industry falls apart, if it falls on its face, it is the federal government, it is us as Canadians who will pay a part of that price. So I think he can use carbon capture and certain incentives around it to compel the kind of leadership, or at least the kind of behavior that we need to see. You talk about the CEOs and the alleged progressives. It reminds me of something that someone told me. I won't say who they were talking about because it's mean, but describe this person as a caveman in a world full of dinosaurs, right? And that's sort of how I feel about some of the CEOs right now. Yeah, they're better than they used to be. It's not Marcel Coutu from Canadian Oil Sands who literally, I think, denied climate change. There was a whole generation of those guys, and they at least accept the science in name now, but they don't accept the implications of the science. They don't accept what is required of them. And I think for that to happen, you need a generational change. You need someone at the head of these companies who was born in the 1980s or the 1970s at least, who was Gen X, who their formative experiences in the industry was not of boom times, of peak supply, and of all these other things, because of how the experiences that you had in the formative years of your career shape how you see the world, and they all see the world fundamentally the same way. So get more women in there, get more minorities in there, get more young people in there, and I think you would see a change. I'm not sure they have the time to do it, though.
Well, I would certainly agree with you on that. What I'm seeing, I'll give you an example. I've interviewed a couple of economists from Wood Mackenzie who say, look, the shortage in the lack of investment in oil and gas production, or in oil production for sure, will lead to higher prices throughout most of the 2020s, we think. And that means that these companies are going to have lots of money, lots of cash flow. And what they should do with it is they should invest in pivoting to a low carbon business model. It's really important. And I don't see that happening in a big way. In a little way, yes. As you say, they're behind. But the point I'm trying to get here is, as Wood Mackenzie says, 2030, the window of opportunity shuts. It's a very different world post 2030 than it is during the 2020s. And there just isn't a lot of time for the industry to adapt. And I think, if judging by this document, if this is where they're at, I agree with you. There's very unlikely that they're going to get to where they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, they need a brain transplant right now, and I don't see it coming anytime soon. Alberta is notorious, legendary for pissing away oil and gas booms. It's part of our heritage. It's what we do. This is the last one, right? I don't know how. I was talking to someone the other day who used to be an analyst with one of the big banks, and he said, he thinks we could see pretty good pricing here for a good number of years, but that's it. That's the last one. And so we need these companies to take this free cash flow, and it's going to be a lot of free cash flow. They're not going to be spending on CapEx. They're not going to be growing their production much. They can do something really interesting with this. The question is, are they just going to give it back to shareholders, or are they going to use it to transform their businesses into something that can last into the 2040s, the 2050s, the 2060s? Right now, I'm not optimistic. And, maybe we need the federal government to step in there and drag them kicking and screaming in that direction, because the current leadership of these companies, their timelines are only the end of their careers, right? And that really is where the disconnect comes in. So, maybe it's large capital holders, maybe it's the government, but there does need to be more pressure applied, not less.
Now, my impression, Max, is that this report kind of landed with a big thud. Nobody's really, paying attention to it. And at the federal level, at any level, certainly not at the COP26 level. Would you share that view?
100%. That the image that came to mind for me was from one of the Batman movies where Batman is threatening to beat up the Joker, and the Joker just laughs at him and says, "You have nothing to threaten me with." And I think that's how a lot of people felt and feel with industry organizations like CAPP now. They have nothing to threaten us with, right? They've tried to throw 2 elections in this country. They've lost both elections. Justin Trudeau gets more popular the more he pushes on climate change. And from a global market perspective, they can't bring incremental barrels on. OPEC is the only game in town there. So they can talk tough here, but they have nothing to threaten people with. And if I was advising them, God help me, I would have advised that they take a much softer hand here. Do actual diplomacy. Acknowledge that you have made mistakes in the past. Acknowledge that you need help getting to where you want to go. Don't try to browbeat the government into giving you money, as Jason Kenney did. And just sort of one final point here, Kenny's been out there really stumping hard for carbon capture. And, he's out the other day saying that the feds had to give the industry $32 billion. He's the worst possible salesperson they could have. If they have a shred of insight and intuition in their collective bones, they should tell him to be quiet, because he is doing them almost immeasurable damage when it comes to their prospects of getting any support from the federal government. The more he talks, the less Ottawa is going to listen.
Well, isn't that the irony? If there was ever a time that Alberta needed the rest of Canada to help it make this transition, so that we've been talking about here, now is that time. And Jason Kenney has been merrily lighting his bridges on fire ever since he got elected in 2019.
Absolutely, but Jason Kenney only cares about Jason Kenney. He's not in this for Alberta. He's not even in this for the oil and gas industry. He's in it for himself. So he will burn the country down to not get thrown out of his job, 2 months before a leadership review or whatever it is. I think the industry needs to kind of pay attention to that and understand that he, not only is he not their friend, he may be their biggest enemy, and start behaving accordingly. But based on the report that CAPP put out, I don't get any sense that they understand that that's the way that things are playing right now.
Well, I would argue, and we'll maybe wrap up the conversation with this, Max, I would argue that the similarity between CAPP's talking points and Jason Kenney's talking points, the government's talking points, they're pretty much identical. I mean, they've been on the same page since about 2018 for sure. And they continue to go in lockstep, and they're doing it again.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the lesson to CAPP here when they pick their next leader. If they pick their next leader, who knows if they're going to be around much longer, but if they are, don't pick a mediocre politician from the prairies. They did that with Tim McMillan, and look where that landed them. Of course, he's going to align himself with Jason Kenney. Of course, for Tim, the politics are more important than the long-term vitality of the industry he represents. Next time they pick someone, pick an actual leader. Pick someone who can do the leadership job. Your friend Dave Collier certainly fit the bill more than Tim ever did, but they need someone visionary if they're going to not wither away into nothingness. They need someone who can actually lead, and best of luck finding someone like that right now.
Max, always appreciate the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.